The Becoming Unsilenced podcast is about awakening to the greatest potential you always were. Listen to teachings, interviews, and inspiring stories of others who have challenged the accepted, expanded possibility, and merged modern day life with ancient wisdom to discover their greatest potential. When you become fearless, you become limitless. Now be inspired by today's episode. Well, welcome. I'm here today with Beth Petta, and she's here to share a little bit about her journey of going from toxic relationships to living a more thriving life. And we connected around this idea of nonviolent communication, which we're going to explore and talk about. But Beth, do you want to give a little bit of introduction about you and what brings you here today?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my partner, Jonah Richmond, just contacted me one day and said, "Hey, there's a woman named Vicki that I've been talking to, and she's been interested in knowing more about nonviolent communication, specifically with women coming out of toxic relationships." And he's not a woman. He is not coming out of a toxic relationship. He is a teacher of nonviolent communication, which is who I learned from. But he thought of me immediately because he knows my history and said, "Hey, I think Beth would be a great fit for you." So,
And that is awesome. I appreciate your willingness to kind of connect on the fly and see if it resonated with you to do an interview. And here we are recording this. So when we first began chatting, and I was sharing with you that I work with women who come out of toxic environments, from religion to relationships to jobs, and you were just going check, check, check.
mhm.
So tell me, what was the checks about, and what resonated with you about that?
Hmm. Yes, I hit all those checks. I was married. I was in a long-term marriage, 22 years in, and had been going to church with my husband, my family. We have two daughters. Um, we were in a church community for about 15 years together. Um, and I was also in a job as a dental assistant working for a dentist that was very abusive. That was about 9 years in that, all simultaneously, all going on at once. My husband was an alcoholic, and our relationship was difficult in many ways. And yeah, that was that was a lot.
That is a lot, and I find that so common that when we are in a toxic relationship in one area, that it's very common for women to be experiencing that in all areas. I certainly experienced that with
Yeah,
toxic bosses, and
yeah.
while I was still in this toxic relationship, and it feels just overwhelming trying to deal with all of it
Hmm.
together.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm curious, what piece did the piece of the church and the religion play in the relationship? And did it keep you there longer than you would have liked, or
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think right from the beginning, I guess I should back up. We were in, I became Christian when I got together with my then husband. I got baptized as a Christian, and right away we were like, okay, we need to get married. We don't want to live in sin, so we got married very early. I was 18, he was 19. And about a year in, he started to drink heavily. He had been an addict, drug addict, but he cleaned up for me to get into the relationship, and then about a year in, he became drinking heavily. And at that, I just remember at a moment in time when he was really, really drunk, and I was like, I should just leave. I need to leave this situation. And this voice inside me said, no, you need to be the martyr right now. This is your job. You need to, this is you signed up for this.
Oh
You're
my
his
gosh.
wife. Yeah. And I was
Wow.
like, it's almost like I didn't know where that voice came from. It wasn't even my own. It was like, no, this is your cross to bear now.
And where did it come from? Like when you think back to that, where did it come from?
I mean, it's I I could think, I could guess now doing trauma work. I had a traumatic childhood as well. I went through a lot of trauma in childhood. Um, there could have been some guilt and shame involved. Coming into the church, we're taught like, oh, you're a sinner, you're this, you're that, and I knew my teenage years. I was pretty wild and had sinned quite a bit. So it was almost as if I think maybe my shame about my past, coupled with the teachings of the church, just basically took
Yeah,
that.
that I identify that because with the teachings of the church, because from my own experience of growing up in very extreme conservative religion, that message of, you're unworthy, you're the
Yeah.
sinner, you screwed up, and is kind of the baseline message of why we need to have
Hmm.
Christianity or religion. But
Yeah.
then this commitment to bearing our cross,
Yeah.
to suffering, to
Yeah.
putting up with things that really don't serve us
Mhm.
is, I find it's extremely unhealthy.
Right.
It led me to tolerate a lot of unhealthy things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So where was like this awakening for you in this process? You're in this religion that is, did it did you seek help in the religion with the relationship or?
Yeah, I did at different times. I mean, we had a good community for a while in our church, and we had good friends and good priests, and they were all really good people, and I was very grateful to have them. In some ways, they really helped us survive. But when I would try to really bring up the subject of, my husband's drinking, or the trauma of our past, even like our childhoods and all of this, it's just like it was glossed over. It didn't seem like, it was taken seriously, or addressed like in a real world sense, like, oh, maybe he needs to go to AA, or oh, maybe you guys need to go to counseling. Or none of that was told to us. It was like, oh, you need to pray more, you need to just obey, you know your husband more, you need to obey the church more. And it just didn't
Did
seem
you
like
feel
it.
like the blame for the situation was almost turned back on you,
um
or that you weren't doing enough prayer, enough handling of the
yeah,
situation well,
yeah,
or?
I would say so. I'd always felt like I just wasn't good enough, like I
Yeah.
was. Yeah, I think I took some blame onto myself, or the message of the church felt like almost hopeless in a way, like I could never be good enough. I was always, this terrible sinner in a way. So I could never ask for more, even, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we're not worthy to ask for more,
Yeah,
right? We're not
right.
worthy to have joy and happiness and
Yeah,
peace in our lives.
exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah. So, what was the point that took you from being in this job where you had a toxic boss, you're struggling in your marriage with your husband who's dealing with alcoholism. You're part of a church organization that's not really offering you solid solutions.
Mm.
Yeah. How did
Mm.
you step out of that?
Well, I mean, I knew it wasn't a quick process. I knew I was becoming pretty depressed. I mean, I was having some suicidal thoughts, and that was a little bit alarming. I had my two daughters, and there was no way I wanted to leave them without a mother. And we moved to a new city, the four of us, our family of four. And with each, it seems like with whenever there's like some kind of change like that, like I got away from the boss. That was the first step. I got away from that one boss that was pretty toxic, although I did happen to jump right back into another one. But I didn't stay as long. I stayed only 4 months, and I quit that job because he showed all the same red flags. um, but it was a new town, and something about that also gave me some hope. A new church. It was the same religion, but a new community. And I was watching my daughters start to flourish with new friends, and I felt like, okay, maybe this is my chance to break free. And it started with breaking free from my job and my career as a dental assistant. I stepped out of that completely, without even any plan of like where I was,
So you
what I,
knew it was just time to go. You had
yeah.
to. And you mentioned red flags there. So for a woman who's listening to this wondering if she's experiencing some own red flags in her relationship or job, what were
Mhm.
those red flags that you mentioned?
Um, yeah, I was, well, one of them was like the intimidation. It was this male doctor, and often in dentistry, there's like a male doctor, female assistant kind of dynamic with this power, which can be very easily abused. And these two particular doctors used intimidation, and I felt a lot of fear around this last doctor. And having just came out of that other work environment, it was visceral. I could feel it in my body. It's like every time I would approach his office, I could feel the fear in my body. I was like, something's wrong. This isn't right. Um, and his derogatory comments he would make about women in general. He was like misogynist, or derogatory comments about my intelligence, or just things like that. Which
So
just,
demeaning, dismissive, put down,
mhm. The big one was the intimidation.
intimidation.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So you broke free of the job,
Mm-hmm.
and then what courage did it take to actually take this step to break free of the marriage?
Mm. That that was the hardest. Um, I didn't, you know, it was actually simultaneous with the church. I stopped attending church with my husband and children, and started to just kind of seek my own, answers. Or even at the time, it was like I just wanted to distract. And I can't say that my transition was like, the most healthy. I did some
Looked a little messy, like it may have for a lot of us.
It was very messy. It was a little self-destructive at first. Yeah, it was, but there was less and less interest in wanting to do things together with my husband. I mean, we'd still try to do things, as fun as a family, just to keep the girls, in somewhat of a healthy situation, but we were just growing apart. And I don't even know if it was courage. It was just like desperation. It didn't feel like courage. I could say that looking back, maybe hindsight it was, but at the time I was just like, yeah, very
More of a survival
survival.
mode. It
Yeah,
sounds, yeah.
that's
And I
right.
identify with that because I came to that same place where I was just like, I am not willing to live in this misery another minute longer. So I've
Right.
got to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. So, what was the journey forward like for you? Because we know now that you eventually met Jonah and were introduced to nonviolent communication. But what did because I find that a lot of women think, well, if I'm just going to leave this relationship, that's everything that needs to happen. I'm done. I'm good to go on. And I really think that's where the true work begins.
Right.
So, yeah, so how did the next phase unfold for you?
Hmm. Um, yeah, that the true work definitely began. I went into learning about nonviolent communication just to, first of all, try to get through our divorce in some sort of a peaceful way without, you know, hating each other. It was just really important to me that we were still going to, you know, be amicable and not be enemies. We had, you know, our children together. So um, it
And
was
how old were your children at this point in time?
16 and 18.
Okay, so they were teenagers.
Yeah. And I at the same time that I was trying to leave peacefully, I was also trying to build in a healthy way because I had to build a whole new career, a whole new community of friends, a whole new me, basically, this new identity outside of being a wife and a mother full time and a church member. Um, and so I just really tried to stay focused on what was important to me, my values, which, you know, was justice and peace and just being good to people in the world. And so I got more into activism and volunteering and wanted to take more and more workshops on personal growth. And it just slowly started to just build from there, meeting the right people, people that inspired me, people that were doing good in the world. And since I was in a new community, a new town, you know, there was a lot to learn what was out here and what was available in my community.
Mm. So one of the things I'm hearing from you, Beth, is that you focused at this point on what you could do to change you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so key in our growth journey because sometimes women can get stuck in this place of blaming everyone else and saying, well, if they had, if this hadn't, then and feel like that keeps people in a victim
Mm-hmm.
space
Mm-hmm.
and not owning their true potential. So how did you use this idea of being able to focus on growing you to change the situation?
Mm-hmm. Something in me knew that I wouldn't have a better life or more peace in my life without looking and staying focused on what was important to me um, and also just still really wanting to be a good mother to my children, a good role model. That was important to me. um, I knew it just didn't serve me to stay in anger or blame.
Yeah.
Uh, it didn't, yeah.
So at this time when you're going through this personal development and growth, like were there a couple key things that you were learning? Like if you were going to share with someone else at this point and say, there were two or three key things that really helped me forward, what would those be?
Hmm. Well, communication was one of them. Nonviolent communication, definitely, um, which sounds simple, and it can be really simple, but it felt like a gateway into deeper self-reflection. Because if you know anything about nonviolent communication, you have to start with your own internal reflection, and before you can even speak the words. So you have to look within and say, okay, what am I observing? What am I feeling about what I'm observing, and what are my needs I'm trying to get? So you can apply that not just with interaction with people, but your whole world, basically your whole interaction with the world outside of you. So once I was looking at those key elements of like, how am I observing what's going on around me and the people in my life, and how am I feeling about all of that, and what are my needs? It just took me more like, it was like I felt my own sense of responsibility to take care of that, you know, to look at how I'm looking at things, to look at how I'm feeling about them, and to look at how I'm getting my needs met. So it was a matter of like really taking responsibility for myself.
I love this taking responsibility because I think that is so important. But also, was it the first time that you had kind of given yourself permission to look at how am I feeling? How's this affecting me? And what do I actually need?
It, funny enough, kind of, yeah. It did seem that way, because it's like, I think I was living in such a way of like, okay, I just need to do this. It doesn't matter how I feel about it. I need to get up and go to this job to make the money so I can pay the bills for my family. I need to do all of this. And it doesn't matter how depressed or how
Mhm.
awful I feel about it. Um, I need to stay married to this man because he's the father of my children, and we're in the church, and that's just what you do. It was like the needs were always external, like the set of rules. They weren't actually internal needs, like, oh, what do I actually need? There were external rules that I thought I needed to follow. So
Mhm.
this was the permission I needed to actually really look inside.
I find that's right where transformation happens is when we begin to do things from a space of internal motivation
Mhm.
versus the external.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did it lead to what transformed in your life from there?
Hmm. It was, yeah, it was, I think I was more clear about the importance of relationship and how healthy they were, romantic or even, non-romantic. And I was developing a romantic relationship with Jonah at the time as well. And, I wasn't always clear about that, because I was like, oh, well, I'm just coming out of a marriage. Should I be doing this? Should I be starting that relationship with somebody new? And, we, um, but in the meantime, I still wanted it to be healthy, whatever it was, whatever we called each other, if it was boyfriend or girlfriend or just friends, I still wanted to be in a healthy relationship. And so, um, that was important. And Yeah, I'm losing track of
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. So, okay. So that was leading you to develop some new, healthier relationships. Um, I want to just pause for a second here because we touched on the nonviolent communication, and I wonder if you could give us kind of walk us through the process of the basics of having of using nonviolent communication for someone who doesn't know anything about it.
Mhm.
What does it mean and how does it work?
Um, well, let's see. The basics, like I mentioned, is basically having a sense of um, being curious about your own internal process and curious about the other person. So instead of speaking at somebody, you're stopping and you're reflecting and saying, okay, I'm wanting to express how what this person did and how that affected me. So you're trying to find a way to do that in the most peaceful and loving way, um, that doesn't trigger a defensive response in that person.
Okay.
So it comes from a statement of your own, like I statements. I observed this, I felt this about this, and I have, these needs. And then be curious of how does this land for you to the other person, so that it gives them the opportunity to do their own self-reflection.
So it sounds to me like it is a space of honoring what the other person is feeling as well as honoring what you're feeling.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we steer away from blame statements. We steer away from, attacks or anything that would feel like you're pointing a finger at the other person. This is coming from really your own experience.
How does that change the response in communication?
It generally will land so much easier for a person to hear somebody express from a place of self-reflection, that rather than you know attacking, because it just brings up more of an empathetic response. It brings up empathy, like, oh, I know that feeling, I understand what that feels like. How can I help you feel something? If you're feeling pain, how can I help you get out of that? Like, it brings up more of an empathy response.
So how did learning this strategy help in the divorce process for you?
Well, it I can't say that it was like the magic bullet with my marriage, or my divorce at the time. It was already ending. My marriage was ending, and my husband was not happy about it. So, um, but it definitely helped me to feel more empathy for him, um, and to feel actually more empathy for myself as well, because I could shift the perspective of wanting to just keep blaming him and staying angry at him into being more self-reflective.
Okay, beautiful. And let's fast forward to today. What is it like to have a relationship with someone who fully appreciates this style of communication and it's the way, the standard, the way of life rather than not?
Well, it's definitely very different. Yeah. um, we don't always do it perfectly. I'll give the disclaimer that, when we're doing the work of learning how to be in healthy relationship, when we're doing some deeper trauma work, we can still have our triggers, but this is a tool. Nonviolent communication has been a tool that we both know well, that we can keep falling back on, so that when we do get triggered, we can take a pause, to take some deep breaths and say, okay, what are our basic tools? Let's start from scratch and like slow down the conversation rather than like going at it with each other, or trying to just like frantically express ourselves from one perspective, but to give a slower back and forth, give and take. And it's been, it's just been a huge help, a huge, like a big tool in our tool belt for keeping things healthy and safe.
That's awesome. I have a lot of women say, what does a healthy relationship even look like? Because they don't even have a map for that. So what are like 2 or 3 things that are different for you today that you could give as a little piece of a map for someone who's wondering that?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I would have to go with how I feel. Like, how do I feel in general about who I am? Do I feel empowered? Do I feel mostly calm? Do I feel safe? Um, if I can say yes to those, then I feel like I'm in the right track. I may not always feel that way, but generally, most often, I'm in the trajectory that I want to be in. I'm still doing tons of therapy. I mean, I'm in the thick of it. It's not like I've turned some kind of page and now I'm healed. I'm still doing a lot of healing work. And we actually do go to couples counseling, Jonah and I, because we both are learning what a healthy relationship looks like.
Yeah.
Um, and it hasn't always felt great in our 7-year history, but I would say if we could keep coming back to a place of safety and security and the determination and motivation to keep growing together, then that's key. Because if we lost that, and we consistently lost that, then I don't think I'd still be in it.
So one of the key things that I heard you say in there is that you're both committed to working forward in this, whether there's an obstacle that's faced or anything, you're both committed and working through it together,
Mhm.
not one person um, stonewalled. And
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it has to take both people fully committed.
yeah. Well, and I honor this that you bring up, that you're still doing the work, because I think that toxic relationships, toxic jobs, any of these forms that we find ourselves in, they often have their roots in what we've experienced in childhood. And
Mhm.
for myself it was that way, but it wasn't until I actually went through my divorce that I realized how rooted the things I needed to heal were back to my childhood.
Mhm.
And so I think it's important for women in this space to have, to be working with someone to help heal that trauma. And
Mhm.
I applaud you for doing that.
Mhm.
It's part of the work that I do with women, but I've also worked with for myself, been to counselors and therapists and
Yeah,
other coaches, and
yeah,
in this
so
in this
important.
healing journey.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
very important. Yeah.
yeah. So as we wind this down and you reflect on the authenticity of your life, because I feel like when we're living in toxic relationships. We have a lot of things happening on the inside and they don't align with anything on the outside.
Mhm.
And then as we go through healing, through recovery, through this transformation of being more motivated by our
Yeah.
inner side, that inner self than outside, then we get to this space of authenticity in our life where things are matching up.
Oh,
So
yeah.
have you tell us about that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big one too. I didn't I forgot to mention that. Um, there was a time going through all of that towards the end of the marriage where I felt extremely compartmentalized. Um, that things were not matching up. I had to be a different person in each scenario, a different person at work, different person at home, different person at church, different. I just, it was all fragmented. Um, Now I'm all just one whole person. So that feels very different. Authenticity is huge, which is also a really good sign of a healthy relationship, is being able to just be your authentic self with your partner. You don't
Yeah.
feel like you have to hide any parts of yourself.
Yes. Well, I didn't share this with you before we started recording, but the name of the podcast that this is going to be broadcast on is Becoming Unsilenced,
Mm,
returning to the greatness that you always were.
mm.
So, how do you feel like you've been unsilenced in your life?
Wow. Um, I'm learning to listen to myself. I'm learning to speak up when something doesn't feel right. I'm learning to speak up when something does feel right. Um, I'm learning to trust myself when I'm feeling off, or trust that I'm allowed to ask for what I need. Um, yeah, I'm still learning to find my voice. Even just doing this interview, it still
Yeah.
feels risky for me. It feels outside of my comfort zone, but it it does feel important as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that we don't leave any thread kind of hanging, where have you come with this piece around religion and spirituality? Because you separated, parted ways with the Christian religion that you were part of.
Hmm.
And where are you at with that piece of your life?
Mm. I'm in an exploring, really open and receptive place. I'm not looking for answers necessarily. I'm not looking for anybody to tell me this is how it is. I feel like it's important for me to just stay an open vessel. Like, if something feels aligns, then and it resonates, and that's great. If something doesn't, then I just stay away from it. But it doesn't. I don't know. It sounds vague, but it's intentionally vague, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want any specific religion. I'm not feeling drawn to anything that's telling me there's the answer.
So you are going inward, you're feeling inside of your body.
Mm-hmm.
One, does this feel in harmony with me and my
Yeah.
body,
Mm-hmm.
which is such a crucial part of that healing journey, is learning to listen to your
Huge.
body,
Yeah.
and then using that as the key of, wow, it either feels aligned with who I am and what I want,
Mm-hmm.
or it doesn't.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's yeah, staying within my own inner guidance.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. So it's no longer about somebody tells me I should do this,
Mm-hmm.
or religion, doesn't matter what religion it
Yeah.
is, but somebody telling you that based on their interpretation of something, you should behave in a certain way.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, you've gone from trapped to freedom. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. And as we kind of wrap up here, Beth, is there any particular key insights or words of encouragement that you would like to share with someone who is on this journey?
Mm. I would just stay questioning, stay curious. Listen to your inner guidance, trust yourself. Um, there's nobody else that's going to know exactly what you need but your own self.
Mm.
And that's, just learn to trust yourself again.
It's beautiful. That's actually, as I use the Eiffel Tower and the models of all my work, the kind of guiding thing that holds it all together is that piece of intuition, spirit, listening to that inner guidance.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you've ended at that space.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate and honor that you were willing to dive into this conversation, have it recorded as part of your own growth journey. And no doubt it's going to be an encouragement to many, many women who listen to it and to keep them going.
Wonderful. I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I very much appreciated Beth joining me today for this conversation. And she just used her own life story uh, to as a example of how we go through this healing of emotional trauma. And it's really key that we get those foundational skills in there and have that support as we go through on this journey, because you're not alone. Whether you are someone who is just waking up to the fact that there's some things not right in your world, or you've been on a healing journey like Beth has been for 7 years after leaving, wherever you're at on there, um, I would love to come along and be your support partner in that healing journey. Thanks for being here. If you have a topic or question you want to hear more about, send it to us at the email below. Have an inspired day.